Welcome to Larkin-Gowan Insights, accountancy and business advice for all, the series that gives you bite-sized tips and guidance on tax, funding, legislation, reforms and much more. With case studies, business advisory and sector specials and even interviews, our team of experts are committed to helping you navigate the world of accounting and finance, with a variety of presenters from across our specialisms. So, let's get on with today's show.
Hello, my name is Bruce Masson. I'm a partner at Larkin-Gowan in the Farms and Rural Business team. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Cath Crowther from the CLA, and we're going to be discussing the recent budget announcements, in particular in relation to inheritance tax. It seems like a very apt day on which to record this podcast, being the 19th of November, as I think many people will be aware that a number of farmers have made the trip to London in slightly less than ideal weather to voice their concern about the inheritance tax changes that have been proposed by the Chancellor. We're just under 3 weeks away from the budget announcements, and it's probably fair to say that emotions are still fairly raw following the announcements. We've obviously received the headlines that agricultural property relief and business property relief will be restricted to £1 million per taxpayer, with any amounts eligible for agricultural or business property relief over £1 million being subject to an effective rate of 20%. With effect from the 6th of April 2026. This has obviously led to a number of unhappy farmers who've relied upon a very benign inheritance tax regime to carry on growing the food for our country. I'll just introduce you to Cath now, and so to give a bit more about herself and what the CLA has been doing in regards to the announcements of the budget.
Yeah, hi Bruce. I'm Cath Crowther. I'm the Regional Director for the CLA in the East. Obviously, the announcements have a major impact on our members, and we've been working extremely hard since then. The policy team, the external affairs team, seeing that machine working has been really interesting. You know, all hands on deck since the announcements, and that's meant lots of meetings with ministers, with officials, with the press to make sure that they're understanding the true implications of this, because Treasury is still sticking with the fact that 73% of farms won't be impacted, but there's lots of reasons why that figure isn't right, because they're basing it purely on APR claims, agricultural property relief claims for 1 year, and that is not showing the full picture of the industry, especially because they're not even considering business property relief, which a lot of people need to rely on for a lot of their assets. We've also done a lot of modelling to demonstrate that impact, which we have now been going through in detail with in the meetings with ministers and with officials as well.
Yeah, I think the data side of it, Cath, that you mentioned is very, very important, because I think DEFRA were using statistics saying that there are 210,000 farms in the UK, and 73% wouldn't be unaffected. But I think it's pretty fair to say that 73% of the unaffected farms don't produce 73% of the agricultural output of the country. And so there's obviously considerable pushback on the data, from yourselves, and likewise ourselves as well as accountants and also the legal profession who pointed this out. I think it's also worth noting is that the £1 million in terms of agricultural property relief and business property relief is actually on the entire holding. So I think a lot of people are focusing on land values, and yes, land values have been high, particularly in the last decade, in many areas touching on an average about £10,000 an acre. But the £1 million allowance actually takes into consideration everything that that is on a farm, so the plant and machinery, the working capital of the business. And I think for many even average sized businesses, the working capital and particularly plant and machinery, which we know has been has really increased exponentially in price over the last decade, will probably eat up that first £1 million of relief before we even get to the actual land itself.
Exactly. On that point, either the government isn't being honest with the public about the true impact, or they don't understand how rural businesses work. And so they need to be in discussions to understand how they do work. Like you say, £1 million for combined threshold for both agricultural property relief and business property relief, encompassing farm buildings, machinery, livestock, the farmhouse. and also diversified assets. So, if there's a farm shop on the farm as well, that does sound like a lot of money. £1 million is a lot of money, but that isn't cash. And I think that there's been a mix up here of personal wealth with business assets, and the fact that the farmer will generally never see that money because it's never intended to be sold, and that it's all tied up in those assets and which are required to operate the farm. Um, and if they were to sell any of the assets, then they would have to pay capital gains tax. So they would be taxed at that point. And I've spoken to many, many members saying, absolutely, if I were to sell any of these, then I accept that I would have to pay capital gains tax. I'd have to pay tax on that. But this is going to mean that I cannot continue to operate my business. So the modelling that we've done, that shows how much of a farm's profit by certain size of farm would be eaten up by the inheritance tax payments. So, and this is obviously a model, and we keep on saying that they've got to consider that every farm, every rural business is different. But a typical 200-acre farm owned by an individual with an expected annual profit of 27,300, which is based on an average over 10 years, it would face an inheritance tax liability of £435,000. If that was spread over 10 years, that would require the farm to allocate 159% of its profit each year to cover the tax bill. And so successors are going to be compelled to sell 20% of the farm, which probably leaves an unviable farm. And that doesn't consider any diversification.
No, I think the point you make about diversification is incredibly pertinent, because over the last 20 years, there's been, certainly everyone has looked into the diversification route, and especially over the last, 6 or 7 years, where we've seen the erosion of subsidies to farmers, and so trying to supplement that, that income stream with a diversified income. So businesses have taken on additional risk to undertake these activities, and and in one fell swoop they could see the rug pulled out from under their feet by quite a large inheritance tax bill, which could lead to either the sale of their diversified project or even actually a reduction in their trade. I think the other point as well is that inheritance tax relief has always traditionally followed risk taking, so those that are actually actively involved in a trade, and so farmers who've actually taken on additional risk, particularly in regards to like contracting work that they do, and have probably had to acquire quite a lot of extra machinery in which to do it, will probably be unduly and unfairly penalised by the fact that they've actually taken additional risks in their business and have got a lot more in terms of plant and machinery, which even a medium-sized agricultural contracting business will have farm machinery with a value in excess of £1 million.
Yep, you look at the value of a combine these days,
Yeah.
then so my parents farm in South Wales. They own 100 acres, but they tenant a much larger area. But they're way, way above the thresholds because the value of the machinery which is required to operate their business.
Well, it's a neat move into Cath as well, the impact on tenant farmers. And I think this has been completely overlooked as well, that that tenancies will now have to be valued. So I won't go to the ins and outs of the different types of tenancy that that farms operate under, but tenancies do have a value, for the tenant, and so if the tenant dies, that will fall into their estate.
One of the things that we have been raising with government is that the tax take from this is actually going to be very small, I think, compared to what the impact on the economy, the rural economy, and the potential welfare burden as a result with unemployment, etc. But also the cost of organising all of this, because they don't have in the valuation office all of the background. A lot of things will need to be considered which haven't had to be considered for such a long time, like you say, valuations of tenancies. We're working closely with the TFA and the NFU and other organisations within the rural sector, but also other wider business organisations. And with the TFA, was saying that it, this is going to impact firstly on the tenants and the value that they've got in their business, but also are they going to, if their landlord needs to sell the property, then do they have security there? And who is their landlord going to become? Is it actually going to be big corporates that is buying up that land? And are those decisions then going to be made in boardrooms in cities rather than what typically is a good landlord tenant relationship with someone? Often there's a relationship for many generations by someone who understands the requirements of the rural economy and the benefits socially, economically, uh, in and environmentally. And I think environmental delivery is really important here as well. Like you said, it's all about confidence to be able to invest.
Mm.
And that's what I'm hearing over and over again from members right now, is that they were planning on doing a project which they've put on hold, because how can they justify that now without the certainty of what's going to happen further down the line? And they're genuinely looking very long term. So they're happy to plant trees, enter into environmental projects, do other things on the farm, put up a grain store, which the return on is very low, because we know that return on assets in farming is very low, which is why the profit isn't there in the first place to pay the inheritance tax and why the reliefs are required. And there's so we're going to see a stagnation, I think, in the industry about investment. And someone said to me last week, why should someone be made redundant? Why should someone lose their job because the boss has died? And we are going to, I think, potentially see some of that going on as well.
Yes, just going back to the tenant point, I think people don't necessarily realise that a third of all farmland in the UK is farmed by tenants. Which is a staggeringly high number, and the impact on those, as you say, the particular relationships between landlords and tenants, because the decision might be taken completely out of the tenant's hand, and vice versa. It is a very undesirable situation on that side of it. Obviously, we're focusing quite heavily on the inheritance tax side of things, but there are other quite unsavoury things in the budget, in particular relation to farm businesses, which are going to come effect, next year. So the de-linked basic payment scheme payments are going to be capped at £7,000, £7,200 next year. There's obviously smaller things like the treatment of double cab pickup. I was going to say vans, but they're no longer going to be called, vans or commercial vehicles. They're going to be classified as cars. Again, it all sounds quite small things, but actually they do have a big impact. And notwithstanding that, so-called carbon tax as well, coming in 2027, which will add, I think people have said conservatively, £50, to a ton of fertilizer. All these things, it's putting increasing pressure on all these businesses, in a very short space of time. In
At
an
a
industry,
time when confidence was already reducing, because the impact on supply chains, the low values in the industry. I think the accelerated reduction in the de-link payments is a major concern, because we all knew that by 2028 the payments, de-link payments, were going to be zero.
yeah,
However, every suggestion was that that would be on a gradual trajectory, as it had been until now. But for that payment to suddenly be massively reduced and capped to 7,200, how do you manage that cash flow in your business when that's happening next year? And we've had, some of the very large farming businesses, which, they may say, well, they can cope. Well, actually, can they? Because
mm,
they're still employing lots of people, and they're often the more viable businesses. For that suddenly to go down to 7,200 is, with no notice, very difficult. And the new schemes aren't ready. That's the problem.
Yes,
if
they've
there was
obviously
all there.
taken the money from, from the basic payment scheme and reallocated it to the environmental side of it, but the new schemes, are not in place, and there's not enough flesh on the bones on those to make an informed decision as to whether they're actually
And
going to.
they're getting there.
Yeah,
There's still, and we absolutely are encouraging everyone to look at SFI, Countryside Stewardship, the other grants that are available there. But we do not believe that the uptake is going to be sufficient for the reduction that they're making next year, because that's their argument. They're saying it's required so that there's sufficient funding in those other pots. But let's hope that the schemes are working really well and uptake does increase, because we need it to increase to make sure the Treasury continues to allocate those funds. But that's not going to happen next year. And so we need some more certainty for next year.
yeah, and the point you made as well about some of the larger businesses, about how they're going to cope. So they employ quite a lot of people. We can't forget, of course, that national insurance for employers is changing next year. And just using slightly rounded numbers, that an employee who's earning, say, 35, 36,000 pounds will add an additional nearly 1,000 pounds, to the employer's liability next year. Again, it's another cost for the employers to bear.
And again, I've had members saying to me that sadly there was someone leaving their business and they're now not re-recruiting that role. And so we're going to see productivity reducing. And Bruce, you and I in the past have spoken about the CLA's Rural Powerhouse campaign,
Yeah.
and that's all about that positive message of what the rural economy could be doing if there were not barriers there. And the fact that the rural economy is 16% less productive than the national average, if that were brought up in line with the national average, it could be worth 43 billion to the economy, which is really exciting. But instead of seeing encouragement of that by things like just ensuring that planning permissions are not holding the rural economy back, connectivity not holding the rural economy back, we've had a budget that is uh, counter to the manifesto commitment of Labour on growth and investment. And we think that productivity could be so much higher if it was, these constraints are all adding burdens to businesses who could be generating a lot more in the economy.
You mentioned confidence, Kath, and I think that's a huge barometer. And so a couple of weeks ago, we were lucky enough to be at the conference, which is quite well timed in terms of just post budget, and when probably emotions were still running quite high. And we ran a poll, which and it was in the previous years. We've run very similar polls to say how confident are we about the future of UK agriculture. In the last 2 years, we've been positive, over 50% positive, and it was very, very telling this year that the same poll, probably a very similar audience, attending, and well over half of people said that they were not confident about the future of UK agriculture. Okay, it was only 6 days after the budget, but I think it was a good barometer to show that where the confidence of the agricultural industry is.
I think we're a resilient and innovative industry, and so we will get through this. And we're absolutely saying to our members at the moment, don't jump into anything. And I know that you're saying to your clients, just take stock. We need to, we've got some way to go here. The issues have not been clearly understood. So I think we need to go and keep providing the facts, the evidence, the information, so that proper, well constructed decisions can be made. And at the moment, we're pushing for a full U-turn on the APR and BPR decision. There may need to be compromises there. I think we're accepting of that, but the easiest option would be for a full reversal, because there's many APR and BPR are vitally important, and they were introduced in order for the businesses to be able to be passed down to the next generation. There's good reasons why they're there, and if they want to target personal wealth, there are many other ways of doing that. So I think that it's concentrating on the solutions here.
Yeah.
And making sure that we've got viable businesses going forward. And I think that if anything, it just shows that the industry coming together, working together right now, really, really important. And I'd also just encourage everyone to make sure that they are talking to friends, family, because there are a lot of people feeling low at the moment. And we've got a lot of very good charities around, some of who we supported at the conference, which will be playing, sadly, a bigger role than that we would like them to need to be right now. But whilst there's frustration, deep disappointment, anger there, we as an industry will get through this, and we, the CLA, along with other organisations, will keep fighting and making sure that government are looking at the facts and figures and basing their decisions on those facts and figures, not just emotive things that they seem to be at the moment.
Cath, I think that's probably a very good moment on which to end today's podcast, and basically to make sure the government keep on listening, to the facts and the figures that they are presented, and hopefully they'll get a greater understanding of the impact, that their proposals, will have. But as you say, the farming industry, if nothing else, is incredibly resilient, and we will get through this, and hopefully there will be some kind of rapprochement from the government in which that a sensible solution going forward can be reached. We did mention the conference earlier. In the show notes of today's podcast, there will be a link to the conference that we held on the 5th of November 2024. More detailed discussions there about environmental schemes, planning permissions, as well as conversations about inheritance tax and the CLA's approach as well. Cath, thank you also very much for mentioning the charities that will be of assistance in these times. Put some links to YANA, You Are Not Alone, and the RABI in our show notes as well. As Cath says, their services may sadly be called upon more than ever in the coming months and years. And we would urge you that if you are struggling in any shape or form, to please contact these charities who do tremendous work in this field. I'd like to say thank you very much to my guest today, Cath Crowther.
Thanks, Bruce.
Absolute pleasure as always, Cath, and thank you very much all for listening.
Thank you for joining us for Larkin Gowan Insights, Accountancy and Business Advice for All. Don't forget, you can find more information about today's topic and more about how our team of experts can help you in your business by visiting our website larkin-gowan.co.uk. Join us again next time for another fascinating insight into the world of accounting and finance.